I am writing these lines from a hospital bed, with one leg in a cast suspended in midair, and second-degree burns throbbing beneath the gauze. The nurse says I am lucky to be alive after that climbing accident. They don't know the truth. No one knows. And if you are reading these lines, please, never search for the name Blackwood on the map. It all started last Tuesday, October 12th. Back then, I was a 2-3-year-old final-year architecture student, living on instant noodles, and carrying a student debt amounting to $87,000. When the letter from the law firm Henderson & Associates arrived in my shabby apartment, my first thought was asset repossession. But no, it was an inheritance notification. A distant uncle named Elias Blackwood, whom my parents never mentioned, had passed away, and left me the entire ownership of Blackwood Manor, a 5-acre estate located deep in the Black Forest, Colorado. According to the lawyer, the house had been abandoned since 1998, but the current land value was estimated at about $1.2 million. $1.2 million. That number danced in my head during the 6-hour drive from Denver. I drove my beat-up 2008 Honda Civic along State Route 9. The asphalt road gradually disappeared and was replaced by a bumpy gravel road as I went deeper into the forest. GPS on the phone lost signal 40 minutes ago. The forest here is dense to the point of suffocation. Towering pine trees, blocking almost all sunlight even though it was only 4:15 p.m. When the mansion appeared after a hairpin turn, I had to slam on the brakes. As an architecture student, I have seen hundreds of old houses through books, but Blackwood Manor bore a grotesque beauty that no photograph could describe. It was a towering 3-story Victorian structure with sharp turrets piercing straight into the gray sky. The ash-gray paint had peeled off in large chunks, revealing the dull black wood underneath like broken ribs. I turned off the engine. Silence struck instantly. No birds singing, no crickets chirping, only the wind whistling softly through dry leaves. I stepped out of the car, sneakers crunching on the gravel. That sound echoed unusually loud in the quiet space. The air here was significantly colder than at the foot of the mountain, carrying the musty smell of earth and something pungent, like the smell of old copper. I walked up the cracked marble steps, hand clutching the heavy bunch of keys sent by the lawyer. The main door was made of black oak, at least 3 meters high, carved with strange shapes I couldn't name. They looked like screaming faces, but without eyes. I put the key in the lock, preparing to turn, but I didn't need to. As soon as the metal touched the lock, the heavy door groaned and automatically creaked open about 5 centimeters, revealing the thick darkness inside. It was not locked. A house full of valuable items, abandoned for 25 years, located in the deep forest, and the front door unlocked? I should have gone back to the car right then. I should have listened to the survival instinct screaming in my chest that something was very wrong. But the greed and curiosity of a young man won. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling and swallowed by the darkness immediately. I pushed the door and stepped in. The oak door closed behind me with a dry clack. Gentle but chillingly decisive. The gray light of the late afternoon was cut off, leaving me submerged in the twilight of the grand hall. The first thing to attack me was not the darkness, but the cold. Outside, it was about 10 degrees Celsius, but inside, the temperature must have dropped below freezing. My breath immediately turned into clouds of opaque white smoke floating in front of my face. The cold here was not like the natural cold of winter. It was biting, sharp, like thousands of needles piercing the flesh, penetrating through my thin denim jacket. Then came that smell. I had to raise my hand to cover my nose. The air was thick with the musty smell of rotting carpets, mixed with a pungent chemical odor, formaldehyde. The pungent, sickeningly sweet smell that I hadn't smelled since 10th grade biology labs, when dissecting preserved frogs. Why would an abandoned mansion reek of corpse preservative? "Is anyone home?" I asked again, my voice sounding weak and lost amidst the soaring ceiling. No answer. Only the steady drip, drip of a water droplet falling somewhere from upstairs onto the wooden floor. I turned on my phone flashlight. The beam swept across the grand hall. The floor was paved with dark rosewood, covered in a layer of dust so thick I could clearly see my own footprints imprinted on it. The furniture remained intact. Red velvet armchairs, busts covered in white cloths, all lying still as if in hibernation. In the middle of the empty hall, there was a small round table placed right at the foot of the winding staircase. On the dust-covered table, There was a single, strangely clean object, a cream-colored envelope. My heart pounded in my chest. I walked closer, shoe soles squeaking on the wooden floor. On the envelope was neatly written in black ink, "To Thomas." They knew I would come, even though I only decided to drive here this morning. My hand trembled as I tore the envelope. Inside was a detailed map of Blackwood Manor, hand-drawn on old parchment, and clipped with the map was a small note. The handwriting scrawled, "Hurried," as if the writer was hurriedly running away from something. The ink pressed deep into the paper, tearing even the backside. "Welcome back, Thomas. Everything in this house is now yours. But listen to the advice of a regretful man. You can go anywhere, sleep in any room, but absolutely do not open the red doors." I frowned, reading that line 3 times. Don't open the red doors? What kind of sick joke is this? I lowered the paper, unconsciously sweeping the flashlight beam towards the left hallway. The light pierced through the thick darkness and stopped at the end of the hallway. There, standing out amidst the dark brown wood-paneled walls, was a door. It was painted bright red, the red of freshly coagulated blood, and I swear I heard a soft whistling wind coming from the gap under that door. My reason, a mind trained in structure and construction logic, immediately dismissed that irrational fear. "Don't open the red doors?" I sneered, though the laughter sounded distorted and dry. This is surely a joke by that lawyer, or a psychological security measure to prevent curious intruders from entering rooms containing valuables. I walked towards the end of the hallway. The closer I got, the clearer the whistling wind became. It was not like the wind blowing through an open window gap. It sounded like the roar of a storm on a high mountain peak, powerful and aggressive. The red door stood looming in front of me. The red paint seemed still wet, glistening under the trembling flashlight beam. The brass doorknob was freezing cold. So cold I felt like I was grabbing a block of dry ice. "It's just a room," I muttered, teeth chattering. At most a storage room with a broken window. I turned the knob. As soon as the latch clicked open, the door was not pushed out by me, but was yanked inward by a massive suction force. A terrible strong wind whipped my face, causing me to stumble forward. Reflexively, my hands scrambled to grab the doorframe tight to keep balance. And that was when I stopped breathing. No floor, no walls, no ceiling. Beyond that oak doorframe was a pitch-black, infinite abyss. I wasn't looking into a room. I was looking down into a bottomless, sucking void. It felt like someone had sliced off a chunk of the house's space and replaced it with the night sky at an altitude of 10,000 meters. The wind screamed madly, tearing at my clothes, my ears popping from the sudden pressure change. I squeezed my eyes shut, my head spinning from dizziness. My acrophobia, which I had kept hidden for years, exploded violently. "Help! Help me!" A weak, dry whisper rang out right below, mixed in the wind. I tremblingly opened my eyes, shining the flashlight down into the abyss. About 3 meters from the threshold where I was clinging, suspended in nothingness, was a bright orange climbing rope, the end disappearing into the darkness high above. And dangling at the end of the rope below was a corpse. It swung back and forth like a clock pendulum in a storm. The corpse wore a professional climbing suit that was tattered, flesh turned ashen gray and decomposing. One of its arms hung limp, swaying with the rhythm of the wind. I was about to scream and slam the door, but my flashlight accidentally brushed over the corpse's wrist. On that bruised, scratched wrist was a black plastic digital watch. It was a cheap Casio F91W, the kind of watch sold abundantly in supermarkets. But what made my stomach knot and bile rise to my throat was the long Z-shaped scratch on that watch face. I knew that scratch. I made it when I fell off my bike at 12 years old. I looked down at my own wrist. The Casio F91W with the Z-shaped scratch was still sitting on my hand, screen displaying 4:32 p.m. I looked up at the corpse again. Its face was half obscured by hair, but when a strong wind blew that matted hair away, I saw its wide-open, milky eyes. Those were my eyes. With all my remaining strength, I tensed my body and pulled the door hard towards me. The suction force of the abyss on the other side was like invisible hands, trying to drag me into that deadly void. Slam! The door slammed shut, cutting off the screaming wind and the image of the swaying corpse. The silence returned immediately, heavy enough that I could hear the blood rushing in my eardrums. I slid my back down the door, slumped onto the cold wooden floor, holding my head with both hands. My lungs burned from gulping air too fast. Not real. Can't be real, I mumbled, my voice broken. I raised my hand and slapped my cheek hard. Pain. You are hallucinating, Thomas. You drove for 6 hours straight without rest. You haven't eaten anything since morning. And this smell. Surely it's gas. That's right. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide. Old houses closed up for decades often accumulate toxic gas. It causes hallucinations, paranoia, and difficulty breathing. I need fresh air. Immediately. I scrambled up, legs still trembling like they had no bones, and dashed towards the main door. The grand hall was still dark and cold, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of here, return to my cramped but safe Honda Civic. I grabbed the large brass door handle, turning it hard. Rigid. What is this? I roared, twisting with both hands, then slamming my shoulder into the door. It didn't budge even a millimeter, as if it wasn't a wooden door but a solid stone wall. Clearly, I didn't lock the door. I remembered very clearly the click when it closed itself. It just clicked shut, right? Panic started rising like a flood. I dashed into the living room on the right of the hall, intending to break the window to crawl out. But when I pulled back the thick, dusty velvet curtain, I froze. No glass. No window frame looking out to the pine forest. The entire window frame had been boarded up tight with black oak planks at least 5 centimeters thick. Rusted iron nails as big as a thumb were driven deep into the wood, solid enough that no human strength could pry them out with bare hands. I backed away, bumping into an old sofa, dust flying blindly. I ran to the dining room, kitchen, library, all. Windows on the ground floor were boarded up in the same way. But the absurd thing was, when I drove in here 15 minutes ago, I had seen the glass panes reflecting the evening light. How could someone board up a dozen windows? In just the few minutes I stood in the hallway without making a single sound, my hand trembled as I fished the iPhone out of my pocket. No service. No Wi-Fi. No signal. Only the time displayed. 4:35 p.m. I am trapped. No, worse than that. I am not just trapped. I am trapped with something that knows what I fear, and it just played with my mind. I stood in the middle of the living room, gasping breath, forming white mist clouds. And then, from the ceiling above my head, which is the floor of the second story, a sound rang out that made the blood in my body freeze. Creak. Creak. Footsteps. Not the sound of rats running or wood expanding. It was the slow, heavy footsteps of someone wearing boots, moving from the second floor hallway towards the staircase. It is coming down. The footsteps stopped halfway up the stairs. Silence crashed down, heavier and more suffocating than the noise. I held my breath, flattening myself against the living room wall, eyes staring fixedly into the dark grand hall. No one was there. No shadow, no monster. Only dust particles floating in the weak beam of the flashlight. But I knew the ground floor was a sealed trap. If I wanted to live, I had to find a way out. And if the first floor windows were nailed shut, my only hope was the second floor. Maybe up there the windows weren't sealed yet. Maybe I would jump from the balcony. Breaking a leg is better than being stuck in this catacomb. I swallowed dryly, bitter bile in my throat, then dashed across the hall, running for my life up the stairs. I ran past the turn where the footsteps had just come from. Nothing there. Only air as cold as a freezer's breath. Reaching the second floor hallway, I exhaled, shining the flashlight down the moldy red carpeted aisle. The hallway was long and deep, walls lined with oil portraits, whose eyes in the paintings seemed to follow my every move. And there, about 5 meters away from me, was another red door. It looked exactly like the door downstairs, but this time, no whistling wind. Instead, there was another sound. Scritch, scratch, scritch. The sound of fingernails scratching on glass. It was steady, desperate, and brain-piercing, like chalk screeching on a blackboard but wetter. I intended to ignore it to find a window, but my legs automatically walked towards it as if hypnotized. There was an invisible pull from these doors, a morbid curiosity forcing me to see what was inside. I turned the knob. This time it opened easily. The room inside was empty, except for an object placed solitary in the middle of the wooden floor. A standing tempered glass box, about 2 meters high, but extremely narrow in width, only about 40 centimeters. It looked like a transparent standing coffin, and inside that narrow glass box was a person. I covered my mouth to stop a scream. It was a gaunt man, skin literally wrapped over bone. He was pressed tight against the 4 glass walls, space so narrow he couldn't bend down, couldn't turn, couldn't even bend his elbows. He could only stand there, permanently compressed. That man was still alive, or existing in some form. He was using his skeletal fingernails torn and broken, scratching weakly on the front glass. Scritch. Scratch. Long streaks of dry blood on the glass-obscured part of the face. I tremblingly stepped closer, the flashlight shining straight into the prisoner's face. He stopped scratching. Sunken, cloudy eyes looked up at me. The flashlight slipped from my hand, falling to the floor with a loud clatter. That was my dad. Not the dad from 20 years ago. It was my dad of the present, with the heart surgery scar on his chest from last year. He was looking at me, mouth gaping, gasping for air like a stranded fish, trying to say something, but no sound could pass through the thick glass. Dad? I collapsed to my knees, hand touching the cold glass. He is in Ohio. I just called him last night. He was watching TV and complaining about the Cleveland baseball team. He can't be here, in this damn glass box in the middle of the Colorado forest. My claustrophobia surged powerfully. I felt my chest being crushed, as if I myself were standing in that box, lungs unable to expand to take air. I saw Dad banging his forehead against the glass, eyes pleading. Save me, don't leave me. I'll break it. Hang on, Dad, I screamed, grabbing the flashlight, intending to smash the glass. But just as I raised my hand, Dad shook his head violently. He stared wide-eyed behind my back, a look of extreme horror appearing on his gaunt face. I froze. Cold air breathed on my nape, breathing right next to my ear. A wheezing, wet breath. I spun around so fast my neck joints cracked, swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The beam cut through the air, shining straight into the void behind my back. Nothing there. Just an empty hallway with dusty portraits staring at me. But that putrid smell still lingered in the air. The smell of rotting breath, pungent like rancid meat forgotten in the summer sun. I whipped back to look at the glass box. Empty. My dad had disappeared. No more gaunt man. No more bloodstains on the glass. The glass box stood tall in the room, transparent and spotless, as if no one had ever been trapped there. I backed away, bumping into the doorframe, limbs trembling. I am not crazy. I know what I saw. The bloodstains on the glass might have disappeared, but the image of my dad's desperate eyes was imprinted on my retina forever. I staggered out of the second red room, leaning back against the hallway wall to slide down to the ground. In extreme panic, a cold flash of realization suddenly sparked in my head, connecting the scattered pieces together. First room, the abyss, acrophobia. Second room, narrow glass box, claustrophobia. I remembered when I was 12, after my mother's death. The school psychologist made me write a fear diary to cope with the trauma. I listed every single one of my obsessions in detail in that black leather notebook. I confessed that I was afraid of falling from heights, afraid of being buried alive in a coffin. This house is not just haunted in the ordinary way. It is a living entity. It is reading my memories. It is rummaging through the darkest corners of my mind, and pulling out the worst nightmares to materialize them. What do you want from me? I screamed, voice shattering in the deserted hallway. As if to answer, the house shook slightly. Dust from the ceiling drifted down onto my hair, and then that sound rang out again. Thump, thump, footsteps. But this time they didn't come from the stairs leading down to the ground floor. It came from the end of the hallway, where the narrow wooden staircase led to the attic. It is hurting me. It blocked the entrance, blocked the windows, sealed the way down, forcing me to go higher, deeper into the stomach of this monster. I tried to remember what I wrote in that diary that year. What was after claustrophobia? I closed my eyes, rummaging through memories. An afternoon at the community pool. My leg cramped. Water flooded the lungs. Deep blue darkness engulfed. Could not breathe. Drowning. I snapped my eyes open. A new sound began creeping into my ears, drowning out the footsteps. Trickle. Water. The sound of murmuring water, like a stream, but growing louder, into a waterfall roar. It was coming from the ceiling above, right at the stairs leading to the third floor. And I saw, from the cracks of the ceiling planks, a dark liquid began to ooze out. dripping heavily onto the hallway floor. I have to run. But run where when the whole house is turning into my own tomb? Water started gushing out. At first, it was just droplets from the ceiling. But in just a few seconds, it turned into pouring waterfalls. The second floor hallway quickly flooded with water up to the ankles. But the most terrible thing was not the amount of water, but its smell. I am in Colorado, a landlocked state, located thousands of meters above sea level. But the water flooding my feet reeked of salty brine and the pungent stench of rotting seaweed. It was seawater, freezing, pitch black, carrying the chill of the deep ocean abyss. Bam! The third red door, located right next to the attic stairs, burst open, as if a water dam had just broken. A massive body of water crashed out into the hallway, sweeping me off my feet. I choked, swallowing a mouthful of salty water. The taste triggered my most primal fear. Thalassophobia, fear of the deep sea. Drowning. I struggled to stand up, water having risen to my knees. The flow from that room seemed endless. I clung to the doorframe to avoid being swept down the stairs, and accidentally looked inside the third room, originally the master bedroom. I screamed, the sound choked off in my water-filled throat. No bed, no wardrobe. The room had completely disappeared. Instead, there was a suspended mass of deep blue water, bottomlessly deep, as if someone had stuffed the entire Atlantic Ocean into these four walls. No bottom, only the blue-black color of the abyss. And floating in that deadly water, just a few arms' lengths away, was a woman. She wore a dark blue silk dress, the dress I had personally chosen to shroud my mother in 11 years ago. Her long hair spread out in the water like the tentacles of a poisonous jellyfish. She had her back to me, floating buoyantly. "Mom?" I sobbed, tears mixing with the seawater splashing on my face. As if hearing the call, the corpse slowly rotated. Slowly. Heavily. Her face was bloated from being submerged, pale as candle wax. The eyes had been eaten by fish, leaving only two deep, pitch-black hollows. But her mouth was opening unnaturally wide, and from it, cloudy air bubbles were emitting. She lunged at me. Not swimming. She shot through the water with the speed of a torpedo, pale hands reaching out of the invisible water surface, separating the room from the hallway, trying to grab my ankle. "Thomas." The call didn't come from her mouth, but echoed in my head, waterlogged and gurgling like a drowning person. I screamed, kicking hard at the cold, slimy hand that just touched my trouser leg. The slippery, slimy sensation like touching dead fish skin made my stomach turn. I turned and ran. Water had risen to my waist. The second floor hallway was turning into a giant water tank. The stairs leading down to the first floor had submerged in the swirling black water. The only remaining escape route was the narrow wooden staircase leading to the attic. The highest place, the last place the water hadn't touched. But just as I set foot on the first step, those heavy footsteps rang out again. Thump. Thump. It was no longer far away. It was right at the top of the first floor stairs, wading through the water, coming towards me. I dashed up the narrow wooden stairs leading to the attic, limbs working at full capacity like a hunted animal. Freezing seawater licked at my shoe heels, but the footsteps behind were what terrified me to the extreme. It was no longer walking. It was running. Thump. Thump. The sound of heavy, sodden footsteps stomping on the wooden stairs created vibrations transmitting straight into my spine. It was rushing forward with the speed of a predator smelling fear. I looked up at the attic door above. It was only about 15 steps away from me, a short distance. But as I ran, an absurd thing began to happen. The staircase hallway began to elongate. With every step I strained up, the door above seemed to recede 2 steps further. The old wooden steps multiplied infinitely before my eyes, twisting and bending like in a high-fever nightmare. Is this tunnel vision, or is the house actually bending space? I didn't know, and I didn't have time to analyze. My lungs burned as if inhaling fire. My thigh muscles tensed, screaming for rest. "Thomas." A call rang out right behind me, close enough that I could feel the cold breath on my nape. I froze. It wasn't my mother's voice anymore, nor was it the deep voice of a horror movie monster. It was my voice. It sounded exactly like my voice in school presentation recordings, but distorted, broken, and overflowing with malice. "Thomas, you're tired. Stop. Thomas." It was mimicking me. It was using my own identity to lure me into giving up. The thought of being killed by something with my own voice pushed my terror to the peak. "Get lost!" I screamed, closing my eyes and pouring all remaining strength into my legs. I didn't look at the infinite stairs anymore. I just kept my head down and ran, trusting the physical sensation of my body rather than my deceived eyes. 5 steps, 3 steps, 1 step. My hand slammed into the crossbar of the attic door. I pushed hard. Stuck. Of course it was stuck. This house never gives me an easy way out. The thumping sound behind was very close. I could hear water dripping from that entity's clothes, falling onto the wooden floor. I could smell the strong stench of mud and rotting meat right behind my back. It was only a few steps away. I pulled out the Zippo lighter from my pocket, my inseparable Lucky Charm, clenched tight in my right fist, and punched hard at the rusted door latch. Crack. Rotten wood shattered. The door flew open. I threw myself into the darkness of the attic, rolling on the dusty floor. Immediately, I kicked hard, slamming the trapdoor shut onto the floor. I grabbed a heavy wooden chest nearby, dragging it over the trapdoor. Bam! A powerful blow from below made the whole chest jump. "Open up, Thomas! I am you!" My voice screamed from below, shrill and insane. Bam! Second blow. Then silence. Footsteps stopped. Screaming ceased. I collapsed on the floor, chest heaving violently, cold sweat pouring out like a bath. I am safe. For now. I pulled out the flashlight, shining it around to check this final shelter. And that was when I realized my mistake. I didn't run to safety. I ran straight into the final trap. This attic room had no windows, no vents. All 4 sides were solid, sealed brick walls. And in the middle of the room, covered by a thin layer of white voile cloth, was a large rectangular object. A mirror. The silence in this attic was even more terrifying than the screaming outside. It was not a normal quiet. It was a deadly, thick silence, as if sound was not allowed to exist in this space. I stood up, brushing the thick dust off my clothes, eyes fixed on the white cloth-covered object in the middle of the room. I knew what was under that cloth. A standing rectangular shape, the frame outlined against the thin fabric. A full-length mirror. Why a mirror? I faced heights, tight spaces, and drowning. But the final fear, the deepest fear, I rarely dared to admit even to myself. What is it? I walked closer, each step heavy as lead. My trembling hand grasped the corner of the yellowed voile cloth. Don't look! A weak voice of reason rang out in my head. You know what you'll see. But curiosity in this house is like an infectious disease. I yanked the cloth down. Dust flew blindly. I held my breath, waiting for a monster to pounce from the mirror, or a dark shadow standing right behind my back. But no, nothing behind me. And more horribly, nothing reflected in the mirror. No image of 2-3-year-old Thomas, soaked, filthy, and bleeding. The mirror face was pitch dark, as if coated with Chinese ink instead of silver. Then slowly, an image began to emerge from that darkness, sharpening like a developing Polaroid photo. In the mirror was a room. It was this very attic, but 100 times more dilapidated. Spiderwebs covered every corner like gray silk curtains. And in the middle of the room, sitting on a rotted red velvet armchair, something that in reality did not exist here, was a man. He was ancient. Facial skin wrinkled, sagging like melting candle wax, speckled with black liver spots. His hair was long, white, draping over his shoulders and matted in clumps. He sat motionless, skeletal hands like dry twigs placed on the armrests, fingernails long and curved like eagle talons. I pressed my face close to the mirror. Breath stopped. On that gaunt wrist of the old man was the Casio F91W watch. That is me. That is me of 50, 60 years later, but not me aging in peace. The reflection's eyes stared wide open, but they were stark white, cloudy from cataracts, and covered by a thin film. He sat there, alone. Completely, absolutely alone. A tattered old newspaper lay at his feet in the mirror. Headline faded, but I could still read it. Mysterious disappearance of architecture student Thomas remains unsolved after 60 years. My throat choked with bitterness. Hot tears welled up. This is my greatest fear. Agoraphobia. The fear of being forgotten. Fear that I will die in some corner, rotting away over time. and the outside world keeps turning without anyone knowing, anyone searching, anyone caring. In the mirror, old me slowly moved. His joints cracked. He lifted his blind eyes to look straight at me, and dry cracked lips moved soundlessly. "Stay. No one is waiting for you out there." Despair crashed down like a tsunami. It was heavier than ocean pressure, sharper than a tornado. This house doesn't want to kill me with violence. It wants to keep me. It wants me to become part of this collection of eternal fears. I sank to the floor, the feeling of giving up creeping into every cell. Why fight? Dad doesn't care. Friends aren't close. Piling debts. Stay here. Sit on that chair. And sinking into eternal darkness isn't easier? Bam! The banging from under the floor rang out again, yanking me back to reality. "No!" I screamed, voice cracking. "I'd rather die than rot here." I stood up abruptly. I can't break the trapdoor to go down. The monster is waiting there. I also can't stay here, waiting to become the corpse in the mirror. I looked around the sealed room. No windows. Thick brick walls. There was only one thing that could be broken. I looked into the mirror, looking at old me, raising a hand beckoning invitingly. I gripped the Zippo lighter tight in my hand. I needed a way out, and if there was no physical escape, I had to create the craziest spiritual escape. I stepped back a few paces, took a deep breath full of dust, hand gripping the heavy Maglite flashlight tight. In the mirror, old me seemed to realize my intention. He started banging his hands on the glass from the inside, mouth screaming soundlessly, his wrinkled face twisted in rage. "It's over!" I roared. I swung my arm with full force, hurling the flashlight right into the center of the mirror. Crash! The sound of breaking glass rang out ear-piercingly, but it wasn't crisp like usual. It sounded like breaking bones. The mirror face cracked into a spiderweb and collapsed to the floor. But instead of silver glass shards, what fell to the floor were pitch-black, slimy fragments, sizzling with smoke like acid-eating wood. And the scream, a shrill, brain-piercing scream rang out from those fragments. Not my scream, but the scream of that old man as he was torn into 1,000 pieces. The illusion dissolved. The room in the mirror vanished, leaving only the bare brick wall behind the wooden frame. Immediately, the banging on the trapdoor under the floor became frenzied. Bam, bam, crack! The wooden chest blocking the door bounced up, wood splitting open. A pale, waterlogged hand poked through the trapdoor gap, long fingers groping blindly for a hold. I had no retreat. I picked up a sharp mirror shard from the floor. It was cold as dry ice. Without hesitation, I sliced the shard hard into my left palm. Slash. Fresh blood gushed out. Hot, dark red. Sharp pain shot up the arm straight to the brain. Pain. It's real. I gritted my teeth. Tears welling from pain, but my mind suddenly became strangely clear. Pain is the only anchor keeping me in reality, preventing the house's hallucinations from invading my mind again. I flipped the Zippo lighter open. The orange-yellow flame flared up, small but resilient. I looked around. The room corner piled with old newspapers and a tattered dusty velvet curtain, perfect kindling. "You like scaring me with death?" I said to the arm reaching up from the floor. "Let's see if you're afraid of burning to death." I threw the burning lighter into the pile of old newspapers. Whoosh. Fire caught absurdly fast, as if this house was soaked in gasoline. The flames were not the normal yellow, but blazed with a grotesque blue-purple, licking up the curtain and spreading fast to the dry wooden beams. The heat surged violently. Black smoke billowed up, obscuring vision. And then, the house began to scream. Not the whistling wind. It was the screaming of wood, of walls, of the foundation shaking. The brick walls began to ooze, a foul black liquid like molten asphalt. The entity under the floor pulled its hand back, emitting a shrill squeal like a stuck pig. I backed towards the tiny, dust-covered skylight up high. The only escape route I just saw thanks to the firelight. I have to climb up there, right now, or I will be burned alive with this hell. Thick black smoke curled up, choking with the smell of burning chemicals and charred meat. The temperature in the room skyrocketed to incinerator levels in just seconds. I coughed violently, eyes stinging with tears, trying to locate the skylight on the slanted ceiling. It was about 3 meters from the floor. No ladder. I grabbed a broken wooden chair nearby, threw it onto the old desk, and climbed up. My feet slipped on the slick wood, but the fear of burning to death turned into a massive dose of adrenaline. I jumped, hands gripping the rusted iron frame of the skylight tightly. Sizzle. The red-hot iron burned my palms, but I dared not let go. I hung, suspended in midair, legs kicking wildly at the brick wall to gain leverage. Below, the blue-purple fire had completely swallowed the trapdoor. The screaming of the house now sounded like the roar of a giant beast being skinned alive. The floor began to buckle, melting away like wax. "Get out!" I roared, smashing my elbow hard against the skylight glass. Thud, the glass cracked, but didn't break. Damn tempered glass. I pulled the blood-stained mirror shard from my pocket, the only weapon left, and stabbed hard at the crack. Crash! The glass shattered, falling on my face like rain, cutting my forehead and cheeks. The freezing outside air rushed in, sweet and fresh enough to make me want to cry. I used all my life strength to pull myself up, crawling through the jagged glass frame to escape to the roof. Outside, it was pitch black. The forest wind whipped my face coldly. The roof was steep, covered in slippery slate tiles full of moss. I couldn't hold on. Just as I crawled out of the window, I slid immediately. My body tumbled down the steep tiled roof like a sack of potatoes. I tried to cling on, but my fingernails only clawed into the damp moss. The roof edge appeared. And then, empty space. I fell freely from the third-floor height, about 10 meters. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the moonless, starless night sky spinning. I saw dark pine tree tops rushing up. Crash! The brutal collision tore through the night. I fell through the dense bushes below, branches whipping my body like lashes, before my back slammed hard onto the hard, root-filled ground. A dry, gruesome crack rang out from my right leg. The pain didn't come immediately. It came after about 2 seconds. A tsunami of pain exploded from the shin, spreading up the spine, causing my eyes to see stars and breath to choke. I lay there, mouth open, screaming silently. My right leg was twisted in an unnatural direction. Warm blood began soaking the denim pant leg. But I was not allowed to faint. Above my head, Blackwood Manor was burning furiously. Purple flames licked through the skylight, erupting into the night sky like hellish fireworks. And from inside the house, thunderous banging on the windows rang out. Bam, bam, bam. Dozens, hundreds of black hands were banging on the wooden planks, sealing the first and second floor windows from the inside. Are they trying to escape? Or is the house trying to reach out to catch me? I ground my teeth until my gums bled, rolled over, and started crawling. I used 2 elbows and the intact left leg to drag my heavy body over the gravel ground. Every inch moved was torture. Every time the broken right leg dragged on the ground, I screamed in pain, tears, and snot streaming down. Must get to the car. Must get to the car. The Honda Civic was parked about 50 meters away. A normally short distance now became a journey across an ocean. Behind me, a loud explosion rang out. The roof collapsed. The house's screaming turned into a loud moaning, sounding like metal being crushed. I didn't dare turn my head back. I feared if I looked back, I would see something crawling out of the fire, with charred skin and my father's eyes, dragging itself after me. My bloody hand touched the cold metal of the rear bumper. I arrived. I shakily fished the key from my pocket, dropping it twice before opening the driver's door. I crawled inside, dragging the shattered leg into the cockpit, resting it roughly on the passenger seat. I turned the key. Click. Click. Engine didn't start. My heart stopped. Don't. Please don't. I looked into the rearview mirror. In the flickering firelight reflected through the rear window, I saw the mansion's main door, the black oak door half consumed by fire, slowly opening, and a dark shadow stepped out of the fire. I let out a desperate scream, slammed my hand on the steering wheel, and turned the key one last time. Click. Vroom. The Honda engine roared to life, the most wonderful sound I had ever heard. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror anymore. I shifted gears and floored the gas pedal. The wheels spun wildly, spraying gravel everywhere before finding traction and shooting off. I drove like a madman down the mountain, with a shattered leg and tears blurring my vision. Behind me, the night sky glowed a monstrous orange red. Blackwood Manor was burning, and I prayed that every evil thing in sight it burned with it. That was 6 months ago. Now, I sit writing these lines in my 12th floor apartment in downtown Denver. The city is noisy, never sleeps, and most importantly, never turns off the lights. I underwent 3 surgeries to pin my tibia and fibula. The doctor said I will walk with a limp for the rest of my life. But the aching leg whenever the weather turns is not as bad as the dreams. I never sleep more than 3 hours a night, and I never sleep without turning on every light in the apartment. Police said the fire was due to a short circuit in the old wiring. They found no bodies in the rubble. No hanged man, no drowned woman, no old man in the mirror. They said I was lucky to survive an accident while urban exploring. I tried to believe them. I tried to believe it was all hallucinations caused by toxic gas and fear. Until yesterday morning. A package was placed in front of my apartment door. Small cardboard box, sealed with brown tape, no return address. When I used a box cutter to open it, a familiar scent hit my nose. Smell of cold ash and burnt wood. Inside the box, lying solitary on old newspaper, was a watch. A black plastic Casio F91W. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was freezing cold. I turned the watch face up under the bright fluorescent kitchen light. On the upper right corner of the plastic glass, there was a faint Z-shaped scratch. I looked down to my left wrist. My watch was still there, with the identical scratch. I don't know how it escaped the fire. I don't know who sent it. But I know what it means. The house, or something living in the house. So it didn't die in the fire. It followed me here. It is returning my belongings. And the most terrible thing is, that watch is still running. I pressed the alarm mode button. 3 a.m. I looked up at the wall clock in the kitchen. 2:58 a.m. 2 minutes left. I am sitting here, lights blazing, door triple locked, gripping the Zippo lighter tight. I am waiting. I don't know what will happen when the clock strikes 3. Maybe a knock on the door. Maybe the sound of water running from the bathroom. Or maybe I will look in the mirror and see myself aged 60 years in a blink. The second hand on the wall ticked forward. Tick, tick, tick. If you are reading these lines, please, never accept what you don't know the origin of. And if you see a red door, run away. The clock just jumped to 2:59 a.m. I heard footsteps in the apartment hallway. They are stopping in front of my door.